Hey friends, it's great to be with you once again. Great to share this time with you as we continue our study of Paul's letter to the Philippians. This is our fourth session in our study of this letter. Last session, we heard about just how deeply Paul loved and missed his Philippian friends and his co-workers in the ministry as he was awaiting his trial in Rome. He told them that in his prayers, he sought that their love would overflow with knowledge and insight in order to bring them to a maturity that would be the foundation for their faith, for their relationships, and for their ministry. Love is essential. Love is central. Love is, as Paul says elsewhere, the greatest of these. But love without knowledge and without wisdom and insight can be driven by the winds of our hearts, the winds of the moment, and it can be driven to the point where our love can become misguided, misdirected, useless really. But when grounded in knowledge and insight, that same love can become focused and essential and a powerful tool for good in our individual lives, in our individual relationships, and in our world. So today we're going to re-enter Paul's letter at the 12th verse, where Paul says, I want you to know, beloved, that what has happened to me has actually helped to spread the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is for Christ. Isn't that wonderful? And this is one of the truly great things about Paul. Even while he is imprisoned, he just won't be silent about the grace of God that he has received through Jesus Christ. He's telling the guard that's watching over him. He's telling that other guard that comes in to check in on them. And he's telling the servants that clean the house and the cook that prepares the meals for the guards and those other guys that come in and chit-chat with the guards. He's still spreading the word all the time, every way that he can. And since Paul sees himself as a prisoner to the Spirit, he claims this as his mission. His mission has always been about sharing the good news of God's grace revealed in Jesus. And he's done that wherever he has gone. And now he just happens to have the opportunity of sharing that good news with the imperial guard, which may well spread the faith to other top officials in the Roman government. And Paul goes on to say now in the 14th verse, he says, and most of the brothers and sisters, having been made confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, dare to speak the word with greater boldness and without fear. This is a secondary benefit of his being imprisoned. Those who have come to faith are hearing about how boldly Paul is proclaiming the faith even in his imprisonment, and they are being infected by his courage and are becoming more and more willing to share their faith more boldly as well. So his mission now, it's growing in an exponential manner. It's not just those that he personally has the opportunity to witness to. It's also about those who are receiving the message through others, who have been impacted by the efforts that he is making as he continues to spread the word even while he is in chains. And if you follow the chain of witnesses, you might well be able to start with Paul there in that cell so long ago and trace his witness down through the ages to the point where it's caught up with us. The truth is that even now, even today, we are made bolder witnesses just knowing this story of Paul's boldness. At least I certainly hope that that's the case. And Paul says now in verse 15, Some proclaim Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. Paul's a realist. He totally gets that some people are out there to prove that they're better missionaries, better preachers, better public speakers, better whatever than Paul is. And they're just using Paul's enforced absence as an opportunity to step into the vacuum, to usurp his position within the churches. And I'll tell you what, from one who is a pastor and has spent much of my life in church and mission leadership circles, I can attest to the fact that there are indeed those who would not hesitate to step in there and take advantage of such a situation for their own personal pride, their own egos, their own status within the church. But as Paul also states, there are others who will try to step up as needed only out of goodwill, to try to help keep the church going and to support the brothers and sisters in the faith while their beloved brother is incapacitated for the time. So Paul goes on to say in verse 16, these, the ones who proclaim Christ from goodwill, they proclaim Christ out of love, knowing that I have been put here for the defense of the gospel. The others proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but intending to increase my suffering in my imprisonment. What does it matter? Just this, that Christ is proclaimed in every way, whether out of false motives or true, and in that I rejoice. For Paul, the big picture is that the goal is attained. He's saying that he's less worried about whether these others are preaching the good news based on their simple goodness of heart, or if they're actually just doing it to spite him, so long as the message is getting out and people who have been locked in their doubts and their angst and their hopelessness get the opportunity to hear of a God who loves them dearly and longs to be reconciled with them in good, honest, loving relationships with them. That's the goal. And it doesn't matter to Paul what spurs these folks on to spread that word around. Now I just interject here for a moment that this can be interpreted as the ends justify the means, which is not always the case. And I think we need to be very cautious of slipping into such a line of thought. What we hope for are faithful people with genuine integrity who share their truth with others from the highest and the most humble and honest of motives, but at the same time, we acknowledge Paul's ability to set aside his ego and allow that he's just as happy so long as the message is being spread to those who need to hear it. No matter whether it's being done to spite him or not. And now we'll conclude the section that we're going to read today from this letter. It's going to be a few verses now, starting with, the second half of the 18th verse. Paul writes, "Yes, and I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. It's my eager expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in any way, but that by my speaking with all boldness, Christ will be exalted now, as always, in my body, whether by life or by death." You know, at first as we read this, it sounds like Paul is claiming that the prayers of his friends in Philippi will absolutely lead to his imminent release from captivity. And I think Paul does kind of go back and forth with this a bit, with those hopes that he might have that he'll leave and he'll survive this. But the real thing that's central here is that Paul's deliverance, as he sees it, is not so much from captivity in Rome, but deliverance from shame. Remember, this is an honor-shame culture, and death is not the ultimate tragedy. Shame is. Paul would be shamed if he were to turn from his witness He'd be shamed if he recanted his faith. He'd be shamed if he promised to stop preaching the gospel. Shamed if he did anything to diminish the glory and the power of the message of Christ's life and death and resurrection. And that's what he wants to be delivered from. And we know this because he says that his goal is that Christ will be exalted in his body and through his witness, whether in life or death. What lies ahead, we don't know. But Paul can probably read the signs from his captivity in Rome as he sees the Jews and the Christians being derided by the Romans, and as he hears whisperings of Nero's megalomania and his penchant for cruelty and persecutions. Paul's got to have an inkling that there are dangers and fiery trials in his future, but his focus is not on his physical comforts or his safety, only that the message of the faith will not suffer humiliation through him. And that makes me think of us today. I mean, here's Paul in prison, facing torture, facing death, and his biggest worry is that he won't be bold enough in his witness to the gospel. And we're so often timid just to let our neighbors know that we're Christians. We're afraid that they won't think we're cool, as if I ever was, or that they won't think that we're approachable, or that we'll be judgmental or preachy or something like that, or that maybe that they'll think that we won't accept them for what they believe or whatever. And I wonder if this isn't what being shamed looks like and feels like in our society today. We're ashamed to talk about our faith because it might be an inconvenience to us. It might embarrass us, might lower the esteem our neighbors hold us in. And I can imagine Paul sitting in his cell thinking, wow, really? That's all it took to silence you? Then maybe you need to sit down and rethink the glory and the scope and the grace of the gospel and the lengths that Jesus went to reveal God's grace to you, and the length that the witnesses, the martyrs over the centuries have gone to spread that word. And if the gospel really does offer you any encouragement, if God's grace gives you any real hope and peace and joy and fullness in life, then maybe you ought to ask yourself if you have anything like sufficient love for your neighbors to share your faith, not arm waving and finger pointing and judgmental and brow beating sorts of evangelism, but just sharing it humbly, sensitively, as the Spirit gives you opportunities. Let's close with a word of prayer. God, we give you thanks for Paul's bold witness in the most dire of circumstances. We pray that you'll fill us with a genuine love for you and for our neighbors and sufficient boldness that we can rise to the occasions you give us to speak out our faith, to speak out of your goodness, and to do this for their sakes alone. Amen. Friends, I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. I pray that your day is blessed. I pray that you can go out with a little bit more boldness because of the boldness that Paul had. Paul lived as he was continuing his mission, even in captivity, even in chains. God bless you all. Amen.